Welcome everyone to another interview on the Beacon channel. This time I am joined by Vixxa. He's one of the mappers for Beacon World League Season 2, and he's here to give us a bit of insight into behind the scenes of the whole mapping process, maybe his thoughts on his own map, the rest of the map pack, and anything else that might be a bit juicy. So Vixxa, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the questions specifically about the event, I'd like to get to know Vixxa a little bit more. I've been very quick with the player interviews, but actually I want to have a bit more of a discussion with you today. And as I'm talking to you, I have your Discord open and I'm seeing, Trackmania Mapper of the Year 2022, TMX Lifetime Achievement 2022, member of Waypoint, driver for Shift, a man of many talents. In your own words, who is Vixxa?
Vixxa is a mapper who is very much appreciated, and I'm really happy that I have that much appreciation from everyone. We're still definitely searching to become a more better and more structured mapper, but still isn't there. Is far on his way, but still has to do a few steps.
I absolutely could have said the cliche of a man who needs no introduction. Because Vixxa is a name that is very well known in the mapping community and in Trackmania as a whole, and one that kind of caught our eye as organizers of the Beacon World League. So can you tell us how you got involved with Beacon?
It's kind of interesting actually, because this year especially has been quite a busy one so far, with all the LANs and all the different competitive projects that I've been involved with. And I think because of the other ones I've done so far, Baltics, but also Big LAN Race, of course, I could already show some unique kind of things that I have not done before in a competitive track. And then Jordi asked me like, hey, this is interesting what you've done so far. We have something interesting to offer you. And of course I couldn't say no to that. And now I'm here.
So what specifically then was your role for this season?
For this season, mainly it was just making a very challenging but also unique track, but as well keeping a little bit of an eye and give some sort of like minor feedbacks on the other tracks that have been made in the process.
So before talking about anybody else's map, I want to focus in on your map for this season, as we have I wouldn't say unique way of doing things, but we have a bit of a different way of doing things here at Beacon compared to other competitions when it comes to mapping. So first of all, your map, what's its name?
It is called Xenogen.
And how would you describe Xenogen?
Xenogen is, I guess, a typical Vixxa map in the sense that it always has like some unique or different sections that you wouldn't see that quickly in your average competitive track, but I always try, or at least really think I can manage to integrate them in such a way that it works for rounds.
How were you able sort of to bring that to the route of the track? What sort of unique ways did you find of maybe laying down some traps for the players?
The interesting thing is this was the first time I didn't feel 100% comfortable with the sections I've made at first.
Okay.
Only after I received the feedback of it, it was like, okay, yeah, this should be fine. The interesting thing is like Beacon is so different in terms of how the tracks are structured. I'd say it's quite intense. There's no sections often in the tracks where you think, oh, here I can calm down and already mentally prepare myself for the next section that is difficult. Everything is right in your face, and with that also the transitions or unique elements that you want to add also become more specific or more difficult to manage. So that's maybe also why I was a little bit more uncertain about things this time, but I think in the end specific transitions that I will not reveal yet, maybe people have already seen from the video by now, I think it provides very interesting rounds. Let's keep it like that. Yeah.
Because I know obviously Asa is the person who sort of focuses on the maps a bit more from our head staff perspective, but we we tend to tell the mappers that these maps are intended for the best of the best in the game, and that should come across quite clearly when driving the maps. How did you go about sort of incorporating that difficulty into your route? I know that you've used some of the sort of new rally blocks in quite some interesting ways. How was that?
It was perfect timing, I think, because with these new blocks, people are still finding out how to use them and what works and what doesn't work. And that also makes it very interesting for rounds, of course, because players that will play on these new blocks in the way that I've integrated them may also feel uncomfortable at first and need to actually really take their time to get very consistent at them. So it actually was perfect to have them right now, because it's both for mappers but also for players an uncomfortable part at the moment, I think, compared to other parts of the track that you could build.
And all of the maps, I feel like, in Beacon map packs kind of have a bit of a different feel. We tend to like giving the mappers room to express themselves within their map. So what would you say is the main style of Xenogen? What is going to be challenging the players the most?
That's a good question, actually. I think there are multiple sections that make it difficult, and depending on what players are comfortable with, that also makes the difference in whether they find one section more difficult than the other. I don't think there is any section or any style. It's a multi-style track, but I don't think there's any section that people say like, oh, this is the really easy part, or this is the most outstanding difficult part. But especially, like I said in the previous a bit ago, that the new blocks, whether that is vanilla or custom use of blocks, those are the parts I think most people will at least find different or unique in a way that it takes a bit of time to get used to. Absolutely.
Having played the map myself, I think you said it's a typical Vixxa map, and I definitely got that feel. And I found that some of the transitions that you've used, specifically sort of in some of the jump drifts, were quite interesting and actually quite fun to learn. Moving on from the route and sort of looking a bit more at the scenery, in Beacon compared to some other competitions, we also have quite a focus on the scenery, giving the maps not only their own identity in the route, and I mean identity in the proper way, but also their identity visually, the visual aspect. So how would you describe the scenery and the feel of your map in that way?
I actually found it really fun to make scenery for the map. That's already a big plus, because for many mappers that's a very difficult thing to do. And it was very much inspired also by the first season, because each of these tracks had such a unique presentation. You could immediately see that's that one track that for each track, and that's kind of what I thought, like, okay, I need to do that as well. And I have quite a few like signature parts of how I make my scenery, but I felt like it wasn't, or it wouldn't be very great in this occasion. I wanted to have something more strikingly obvious immediately when seeing the map. So I was very much inspired by Yabibo, a very talented mapper, of course, and I added some scenery elements that he uses in his tracks in my own way. So I would absolutely not consider my map looks similar to Yabibo's scenery, but you can definitely see maybe that I think I made better scenery than usually because of certain ways of how he places blocks.
Final question on your map, actually. I know you play a little bit as well. You have done some competitions in the past. How would Vixxa as a player feel about Xenogen being in the map pack?
Nervous, I think. Generally, yeah, generally.
That's a good thing, though.
Yeah, that's a good thing, I think. Of course, I don't consider myself a pro or anything in this game. I know how to push the buttons, but I'm definitely not an insane player. So I think it's actually good that I would be very impressed by the design, but I would be very intimidated as well by the route. And I hope that even the biggest players will also have that feeling just a little bit. It should be nice if they are a bit uncomfortable and think like, okay, this will be a job to learn. So that would be nice.
what player, understanding their sorts of skill sets, do you think this map is suited to?
Ooh, suited to.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually the players that are the easiest, also working with new blocks, actually have a major advantage, I think. So I wouldn't
Okay.
be surprised if Wissy, for example, does really well, because he's also very skilled in mapping himself,
Mhm.
and therefore might have an easier time with at least learning the track. I don't know if he eventually would become the fastest, but I think he would be the least intimidated by the route. Let's keep it like that.
So, being an experienced mapper like you are, somebody who's mapped for many competitions, what for you is sort of the main definition of a comp map these days?
Actually, a comp map is pretty much nothing different than an ordinary calculated track, but with less room to go from the ideal line. That's basically what it is. It just makes things, if you mess up and not go on that ideal line, hitting each apex, you will lose a considerable amount of time or crash. And that really makes the difference. And of course, you can make it as wild as you want by adding more transitions or adding more things, basically, or interesting elements during that driving on the ideal line.
I definitely have to agree with that. I think for me, as long as something is consistent, can be done better or worse, but is dependent on, the player's skill and however they approach a certain situation and whether or not they get a better or worse outcome from it. And I think from there, you can really get quite creative. How would you say that sort of the beacon maps compare to the rest of the pool of competitive maps that we have in Trackmania?
The thing that is most strikingly obvious for me is absolutely the difficulty in not only just difficulty in general, but also, like I said earlier, the lack of almost like breathing points where you can take a rest. Like there's so many other projects or lands or competitive events where the tracks always have like that section that is not as important. And I feel like with Beacon, there, from all the maps I've seen, both in the first season but also the new maps that are coming out now, I definitely see like there's almost no breathing room. There is happening so much at one moment.
I've already seen the map, and the players will have seen it by now, and you've definitely delivered on sort of that difficulty aspect, I would say. So what was your experience sort of doing this compared to maybe an open map request, or just being given a brief and being asked to make a map?
I think first of all, it's so much just the opinion of like the organizers, how they want to do things, because we obviously there are negative and positive aspects, whether you go with a public announcement and let people build for it and pick certain maps, or approaching players in advance. If you do it in advance, you can really focus on that player, give feedback in between certain mapping sections, and I think it often leads to a better result in the end. On the other hand, of course, if you do like a more public thing beforehand, you can maybe hype up certain parts of the event more at more people at the same time. But yeah, you also lose a lot of tracks that do not make the cut. All that time spent is also unfortunate. So in this case, we of course, I was approached beforehand, and I think it's nice to know that you already know that you are part of the project and you will map for it, because you can immediately talk about what needs to be in there, what would you like to see. That's what I always kind of appreciate up front, having the conversation of what do we want, what do I want, but also what do the organizers want, and how can we bring those steps the closest together.
And you mentioned obviously there's positives and negatives to each, and I think as organizers we're very much aware that this method of doing things can give us a result that is more in line sort of with what we imagine or would want the map pack to be. But also there's some who might see it as being unfair, that certain mappers don't get the opportunity to map for a prestigious competition like Beacon. Do you think that is the case?
I don't think it's unfair. I think it's something that the organizers can choose for themselves, simply because it's their event. They know how they want to make their directions, and it of course many people will probably want to map for certain projects, but I could also ask myself, if I want to map for something that I'm not qualified for, the people, the organizers know what they want, and they know probably usually in any project or LAN or whatever, they know which players will most likely be the best suited for that specific event at the time. And usually it is more than like one player that can do that specific thing. But it's nice to know that you know that person will be involved from the beginning, and that you do not wait for having like a mapping request, and you might not get what you want, or the player or mapper that you want involved.
I think, yeah, from an organizer perspective, I think, we sort of do our map requests and contact mappers because we feel that it gives us the best result in terms of what we need for the competition. That being said, we don't want to exclude certain talented people and people who might deserve the opportunity of mapping for an event like Beacon. The mapping process as a whole from start to finish is something that us as organizers are actually very involved in. And I think, I refer to Asa and all the other map testers that we have, some really high quality players. I imagine that you have, go-to names that you ask to test some of your maps when you're creating them. So how was your experience working with the map testers for Beacon?
It was absolutely horrible. No, it was great. It was really nice to have quick feedback, and also usually quite detailed feedback, because there's never a perfect track. There's always issues with a track. The track cannot be perfect, and then it's very appreciated that you get feedback pretty much immediately. And also, I have quite a busy schedule. I have often a lot of projects related to Trackmania going on at the same time. So sometimes I only have like a short time frame, and then it's so much appreciated that you have like a really steadily available person, or at least multiple persons, sometimes even, that you can contact, and you can immediately get the feedback that you need and want.
So we've spoken about your maps, we've spoken about your experience mapping for Beacon, and obviously all of that has culminated in a map pack that we have for Season 2. I know you're aware of the Season 1 maps, you checked them out, you mentioned them when we contacted you initially. How do you think this season's map pack compares to Season 1?
I think it's a further continuation of what I found so strikingly interesting about the first season. It was kind of the boldness in presentation, in doing things different than previous editions. And I think in Season 2 we just decided to multiply it by 15 and go even further with that boldness. Like really kind of touching on what can we do? What can we do to make this more interesting, to make it sometimes more difficult, to make people, or players I should say, more uncomfortable, like really challenging them to things they have not seen before. And I think we've done a really good job again with all the mappers together, with further accentuating the things that made Season 1 special, and now taking it a step further.
What piece of advice would you give a player who's approaching this map pack? Let's not focus on maybe the top players, not the ones that are qualified for Division 1, but maybe somebody who's looking to qualify themselves into Division 2, into that top 32. What would you give them as advice?
First, consistency, and then the pushing. This is definitely a map pack where if you make a mistake, you are out. So I would definitely say first get that consistency going on, and then if you need to push, you can push, but that consistency definitely first needs to be even more. That's always the case with any competitive event, obviously, but I think since the difficulty is so high and certain section can be so punishing in this case, I think it's even more true than normal.
Final piece of advice that I'd like to get from you for any aspiring mappers out there, some who might hope to map for a competition like Beacon one day. What What advice would you give them to get themselves noticed and get themselves to the top?
Show yourself off, basically. So keep mapping, keep don't wait for a few months to upload your next track. Eventually, if you keep delivering, posting tracks on TMX, on Track of the Day, you slowly get more noticed. I don't think I would have had so many competitive projects that I'm working on if I wasn't nominated for Mapper of the Year, for example. I wasn't maybe I wasn't never asked for Beacon. You don't know. So yeah, if you need to establish yourself as someone who is active, who represents the game, and then you will definitely have the biggest chances of getting loads of projects going on.